Now let's quickly talk about the various terms in the Bible for hell. I'm on page 1 of your handout, letter C. There's Sheol, the Old Testament word for where everyone went after they died under the ground, especially the wicked. Hades, which is a common Greek word used to translate Sheol. Hades used 11 times in the New Testament, sometimes implying a place of punishment. Like in Luke 16, the rich man is in Hades. Matthew 16, the gates of Hades will not overcome the church. Capernaum, for their unbelief, will be brought down into Hades. And in Revelation chapter 20, Hades is thrown into the lake of burning sulfur. Then there's Gehenna. Gehenna was a valley, the valley of Hinnom, just outside Jerusalem. And it was a garbage dump at one time. This is a typical, in the Middle Ages, they said there was this valley south of Jerusalem where they threw their garbage. And that was first mentioned in the Middle Ages, but we, on the Israel trip that our seminary takes, I got to go a few years ago, and Yehuda, our tour guide, said the same thing. So it's still being taught in Israel that the Gehenna was this valley of Hinnom, which was a garbage dump. But it also was, from 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, it also was a place of child sacrifice to Molech. So Jesus referred to this valley, and it's not entirely clear. Was he referring to it because it was a garbage dump that was always on fire, always burning, or was he referring to it as a place of child sacrifice? Could be both, but that's Gehenna is a word that's often used by Jesus. And then, of course, the lake of fire, which is the final destiny of the damned. So those are the terms. A few questions just to ask before we have our class discussion about the reality of hell. Is hell physical pain or is it spiritual pain? And I would say, well, it's both, right? The whole person, if the whole person is in hell, the whole person is suffering. Now, the Bible describes hell as fire and blackness, and so it sounds metaphorical. How can there be blackness and fire? If there's fire, there's light. And I think the key here is that the Bible is using analogies. God is using language, terms that we understand to try to communicate how awful hell is. Hell may not have literal fire and blackness and worms. These are God using descriptions to try and show us how terrible hell is. Just like heaven, the streets of heaven are described as being transparent gold. That doesn't have to be literal, right? God's point there is, you know what you value most in this life? Gold? Well, that's going to be pavement in the next. The point is, heaven, when heaven comes to earth, the new earth is going to be so much more beautiful than mere streets of gold. But that's God trying to show us how great the new earth will be. And so like that, there may not be literal worms and fire and blackness. That's not the point. It's going to be way, way worse than that. Much more suffering than that. God is trying to use images from our experience to horrify us about the nature of hell. So it will be real pain, but the images may not be literal, but not because it's not that bad, but not literal because that's the best God can do to communicate to us how awful hell is. What about degrees of punishment? Well, the Bible teaches that, right? Matthew chapter 11, Jesus said, it'll be more bearable for Sodom than for you, Bethsaida and Capernaum, because they didn't see me like you did, so your punishment will be much worse than theirs. Luke chapter 12, a servant who sins unknowingly will be beaten with fewer blows. So it seems that there are degrees of punishment even in hell, even though the whole thing is just terrible. And one last question. Is hell penal or merely the effect of natural consequences? And this question will arise in the book, in our reading and our class discussion. But let me just say a word about that. Is hell a penalty? Is hell primarily punishment? Or is hell just natural consequences? there's this parenting book called Love and Logic. And the point of it is avoid power struggles with your kids. Don't fight them over wearing a coat in winter. Just allow Johnny not to wear a coat. And when Johnny's in the back seat of your car shivering, you just show empathy and say, I'm sorry, I'm sure it must be cold. And then Johnny learns next time to wear a coat. So the point of good parenting is avoid power struggles at all cost. Second rule, if you do get into a power struggle with your kid, you must win at all cost. But try to avoid them. And you avoid them by just letting natural consequences do its work. You show support and love and concern, but your kids, you want them to fail. You want them to make mistakes. You want them to shiver in the back seat. So they learn next time for themselves to wear the coat. So the thinking goes that maybe that's what hell is. Maybe God isn't sending people to hell. Maybe God is just allowing sinners to choose it. And if they choose hell, well, that's what they get. It's the natural consequence of their choices. Like C.S. Lewis said, hell is locked from the inside, right? And there's real truth to that. So one philosopher in an article about this said, well, he thinks hell is primarily natural consequences. But then he said, but the cross, that's punishment. On the cross, God was punishing Jesus in our place. So there must be a place for punishment too. So let's make hell primarily natural consequences, and then let's append to that, it's also penalty. It's also a punishment. Because if it's not punishment at all, then the cross doesn't make any sense. So hell is natural consequences, and then as an appendix, it's also penal or a penalty. I have a problem with that though, because if that's what hell is, primarily natural consequences, and the penalty is only an appendage, that makes the cross, if the cross is primarily punishment, that makes the cross primarily an appendage. But the cross shouldn't be an appendage. The cross is the very heart of the Christian faith and what God has done to save us. So if that's true, I think you have to say hell is primarily penalty. Hell is primarily punishment. It's also natural consequences, but the natural consequences, that's the appendage. That's the thing you add to it. The fact that, yes, it is locked from the inside. That's important to say, but it's not the primary thing to say. The primary thing to say is hell is punishment. And that's tough for Americans to hear because we like our punishment to be rehabilitative. We want, if someone goes to prison, it's for the chance to change their life and come out better, hopefully. And again, that's a good thing. But we have a really hard time just locking someone away forever and ever just for punishment's sake. I get it. I understand that. But the cross must be the center of our Christian faith. The cross is punishment. God punishing his son in our place. He took the wrath. He bore the guilt. And if that's true, then hell has got to be primarily punishment too. Because Jesus went to hell. He suffered the horrors of hell in our place. So with that introduction, we'll stop and look forward to a very important discussion in class over an extremely important topic. Like this is the point of being a Christian, right? We are saved for Jesus, and we're saved from something terrible. We're saved from sin, death, and hell. So let's not shy away from talking about that, and we'll start by discussing this in class.